The CIA has a long history of shady practices, the most notorious one being drug trafficking. Allegations of trafficking in general started to pop out in the middle of the Korean War. Here, they would provide weapons to Chiang Kai-shek's military generals. In return, those same generals would provide valuable intelligence to the CIA. In the 60s, the CIA was funding an unauthorized war in that same area from decades prior. To support this operation, the CIA pilots would use the infamous Golden Triangle to traffic large shipments of heroin for profit. Going into the 70s, Nicaragua went through a rebellion. It was led by the Sandinista National Liberation Front. When they finally gained power in 1979, many people at that time did not agree with their political ideologies. This, of course, included the Reagan administration in the US, as they were very right-leaning on the political spectrum. So when the Contras in Nicaragua rose and decided to bring yet another rebellion, the US government sent aid to support their efforts to overthrow the Sandinista government. However, with the Bowen amendments, the US Congress eventually blocked these types of financial care packages, leaving the Contras underfunded. Here is where our story deviates a little. This eventually did lead to the Iran-Contra case in 1987, which focused on weapon sales to Iran at an insanely marked up price, and then using the excessive profits to fund the Contras. But today, we are taking a deep dive to another aspect that is not talked about enough, and that is the CIA using drug money to fund the Contras in collusion with now notorious narcos of that time.
Good evening. Welcome to West 57th. Our first story tonight contains new and startling information that indicates the American government got involved in smuggling drugs to supply the Nicaraguan Contras. That's right, drug smuggling, organized by the CIA to support the Contras.
Miguel Ángel Félix Gallardo, Rafael Caro Quintero, and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo were the three godfathers of the Guadalajara Cartel. They were some of the first narcos to build connections with the Colombians down south to move their operation would pull in about $5 billion annually. They of course bribed their way through the Mexican government to receive protection. However, the most valuable asset they bribed was the DFS, which was sort of a secret police/intelligence gathering agency. It was created in 1947 under Mexican President Miguel Alemán Valdez, with the assistance of U.S. intelligence agencies, namely the CIA. The DFS was already a corrupt organization. They were behind many disappearances of people during the Mexican Dirty War in the 60s and 70s, so it was not surprising to find out many of the DFS's top agents were taking direct bribes from them. It is unknown to how exactly the Guadalajara Cartel came in contact with the CIA, whether if it was the DFS or a drug supplier known as Ramon Mata Ballesteros, who was already moving weapons and drugs to Nicaragua using an airline controlled by him, known as SETCO. The CIA offered protection to the Guadalajara Cartel from organizations such as the DEA. In return, they would provide financial aid using their profits that were shipped into the US to fund the Contras. There are many instances that back this type of alliance up. In 1982, the DEA noticed a Bank of America account moving around $20 million a month from Miguel Ángel. In its investigation, it contacted the CIA for aid. The CIA, however, did not cooperate with the DEA for unknown reasons. Financial aid, however, was not the only type of contribution that the cartel gave to the CIA. Rafael Caro Quintero, one of the other godfathers, had two main ranches: the Buffalo Ranch, which is where he held multiple tons of marijuana in the state of Chihuahua, and his Veracruz Ranch. At this ranch, it is alleged that he allowed the CIA to train Contra guerrillas for their secret war. They would also receive large shipments of weapons supplied by Gerhard Martens, a former German in World War II. However, this type of alliance could not be kept under secrecy forever. Eventually, a reporter named Manuel Buendia began to investigate the activities that were occurring at the Veracruz Ranch owned by Rafa. He intended to publish a story that connected the narcos, paramilitaries, and the CIA to illegal activities. But after publishing his story, a man seen wearing a baseball hat and a black hoodie approached him and shot him with a 38 caliber pistol. Manuel was armed at the time, but he was not able to react to the assailant. Hector Berreyes, a former DEA agent, will later go on record stating that the CIA wanted him gone, which led to the Mexican Interior Minister to have him killed.
Now, Channel 7 News with Gary Redstone, Anna Chavez, weather with Beverly Johnson, and Martin Wyatt with sports.
Mexican police let a known drug dealer get away, who was under federal indictment also in the kidnapping of an American drug agent in Mexico. That's the charge being made now by the head of drug enforcement in the U.S., Francis Mullen.
Before the death of Buendia, Enrique Camarena would begin his own investigation into the topic. He would go undercover as a farm worker to the Buffalo Ranch, but he was not really as undercover as he thought he was. To quote Reddit user Hope That Helps, it's claimed that Quintero and the other bosses knew Camarena was at the farm, but that he assured them that he wasn't interested in busting anyone that far from the US border, and they trusted him because he was a fellow Mexicano, so they left him alone. Camarena, though, was obviously lying. In 1984, he and Mexican pilot Alfredo Zavala flew overhead the ranch and took pictures of the massive marijuana field. Later that year, the police raided the ranch and destroyed the roughly 2,500 acre sized field. Upon hearing the news, Rafael Caro Quintero was livid with Camarena. At the same time, though, it is reported that Camarena was on the brink of uncovering the connections with the CIA and Quintero's other ranch. The CIA, however, did not want this type of information to go public, but they used Quintero's anger at Camarena for their own benefit. On February 7, 1985, Camarena was abducted by DFS officials in broad daylight in front of the U.S. consulate. He was then taken to 881 Lope de Vega, a house owned by Ruben Zuno Arce. Here, Camarena and the pilot Alfredo Zavala, who was also kidnapped, were tortured and killed. Their bodies were found a month later. The plan was always to kill off Camarena at the end of the session. However, Ernesto Fonseca wanted to take him to a hospital and let him go. Quintero disagreed and a standoff ensued. Fonseca had more men, so Quintero angrily left the building. Quintero still went ahead with the murder anyway. Had Quintero been smarter, he had realized that he was being used by the CIA and their own government for their own benefit. And of course, when the US wanted justice, both Quintero and Fonseca were given up as the faces of the kidnapping of Camarena.
¿Cómo es explicable que el DEA, los antinarcóticos norteamericanos, te hayan señalado como uno de los principales narcotraficantes?
O sea, también los Estados Unidos.
No es, señorita, no es.
Ellos son los que conocían tus casas, tus ranchos, la primera vez que fue la Policía Oficial Federal.
Pues a lo mejor sí. Es que haber ido a pasearse alguna vez antes.
Son muy metichos los gringos.
There are also various accounts of what exactly the torture session was about. The official story is that they were tortured over the Buffalo Ranch raid in 1984, which is half of the truth. But years later, corrupt Mexican police, who were bodyguards of both Quintero and Fonseca, talked about them being present at the torture session. They claimed that there was a Cuban man interrogating Camarena. None of them had ever seen them before. This Cuban was presented as Max Gomez. His real name, however, was... This Cuban was a CIA agent who was a part of the squad that took down Che Guevara in the 60s. He was also very close to Ronald Reagan and was a key figure in the Iran-Contra case in 1987. The Cuban wanted to know what Camarena had uncovered about the operation they were running at the Veracruz ranch, and it's more than likely the only reason the kidnapping was greenlit in the first place. Apart from the CIA presence at the torture, other high-ranking Mexican officials, like the Mexican Secretary of National Defense, General, and General Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, were also present. When going into the late 80s, Miguel Angel was still a fugitive, and the DEA commenced Operation Leyenda to go after any other participants that were connected to the murder. Hector Berreyes was put in charge of the operation as he already had a massive array of informants in Mexico. In his efforts, he kidnapped a doctor named Humberto Machine. Allegedly, this man was called upon during Camarenia's torture to administer adrenaline shots directly into his heart so that he would stay awake. The doctor was then sent to the US as there was an indictment waiting for him. However, in 1993, he was cleared of all charges due to underwhelming evidence. He was then sent back to Mexico. While he played a smaller role in the grand scheme of things, you might want to remember this guy as he comes back into play in this story. In 1989, Felix Gallardo was captured in a raid on his villa in Guadalajara. This operation was led by Guillermo Calderoni, a commander of the Mexican Judicial Police. Calderoni was always considered solid by officials in the government until he wasn't. A warrant was issued for Calderoni's arrest in Mexico. Fearing he would be killed, he turned informant and contacted Hector Berreyes. Hector would then hide him across the border in El Paso. In return, Calderoni warned Hector to stop investigating the Camarena case, stating, "Your own government killed Kiki." Moving back forward to 1993, Humberto Machine was returned back to Mexico and was held a hero. He then proceeded to sue the US and was awarded $25,000. At the same time, however, Mexican and US officials met and discussed the kidnapping of him. A warrant was then issued for Hector Berreyes. This led to the DEA removing him completely from the investigation. Hector was then transferred back to Washington, D.C., where he was given a simple job where he sat at a desk all day. Hector claimed he felt betrayed by his own government. Hector would then allege that a CIA agent came to intimidate him. The CIA agent stated that the CIA is not bound by constitutional law, and he should keep his mouth shut about the CIA connections he uncovered, as if he didn't, he would be handed over to the Mexicans, prosecuted for the kidnapping of Humberto Machine. Years later, Guillermo Calderoni allegedly threatened to go public with information that would expose the Mexican and US governments, and claimed to have tapes of Camarena's torture, which included several sensitive names. He was murdered on February 5, 2003, in McAllen, Texas, days later. As for Hector Berreyes, he would retire from the DEA in 1996 and would come forward on multiple occasions throughout the 2010s, where he talked about his findings, as the warrant in Mexico had already expired by then. In 2020, he would be included in the documentary The Last Narc, which also included the informants that were present at the Camarena torture. The documentary was blocked temporarily before its release for unknown reasons.
Hostages, nor will we.
Despite Reagan's denials, investigations soon revealed that arms had been traded for hostages held.
The Cuban CIA agent, who was allegedly present at the torture, has stated that he had no involvement in the Mexican drug trade, or the murder of Camarena or Zabala.